I'm Craig Timm, and this is ACAMS Live. Thank you to everyone out there joining today. Feel free to say hello in the comments. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Today, we are talking about fentanyl, the synthetic opioid 100 times more potent than morphine that in the United States alone has claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. Targeting the financial flows of illicit fentanyl trafficking to disrupt these deadly supply chains has been a top priority of the US government and specifically the US Treasury Department. To talk about how the US government has been responding, I'm joined today by Dilara Bogut. Dilara is the Director of the Office of Stakeholder Integration and Engagement at the Treasury Department Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN. Dilara, along with her colleagues at FinCEN and across the US government, have been leading some really interesting information sharing and public-private partnership initiatives to try to combat the fentanyl crisis. We're going to talk about all of that today. So first, Dilara, thank you so much for being here.
It is an honor to be here with you on ACAMS Live.
Well, as I mentioned, FinCEN has taken what I think is a unique approach from a public-private partnership perspective when it comes to fentanyl. So can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing and why you've taken this approach?
Thanks so much, Craig. Before we get started, I just want to thank you and the ACAMS team for just simply inviting me to have this conversation. As you know, this is such a top priority for Treasury and FinCEN, and so it means a lot that you've encouraged this conversation to take place. So, while I have the great privilege to talk to you about this important topic, I just want it to be known on the record that this exchange series would not have been possible without FinCEN's co-organizers, which are IRSCI. Lauren Kaur, Kurt Bertram, and Paulina Rodriguez in particular. So quick shout out to them. Thank you guys so much for all your support. So Craig, let me focus on a word you just used, which is the word unique. So as you know, FinCEN has been continually enhancing its public-private partnerships and information sharing processes. And over the last several years, we've been taking some newer approaches to our PPP and info share models to better address the root of a national security issue. And that's quite simply because public-private information sharing remains a key component of an effective AML CFT regime. And it's quite frankly a really critical way in which the public and private sectors can work together to counter the illicit finance threats that we're facing. So before I get into your question, let me just quickly take a moment to set the stage, all right? So back in December 2023, former TFI Undersecretary Brian Nelson and former IRSCI Chief Jim Lee announced the creation of what came to be known as the Counter Fentanyl Strike Force. This whole initiative was set up and designed to be able to kind of harness the collective expertise in tracking illicit financial flows as part of the US Treasury's response to addressing this awful and deadly fentanyl epidemic. And so as part of the Counter Fentanyl Strike Force initiative, the FinCEN Exchange program really emerged as a very powerful tool for engaging with financial institutions on this critical issue. And so building up momentum, my team and then the folks at IRSCI, we sat down and we basically came to form and introduce what is now known as the Protect Exchange series. It's an initiative born from the Strike Forces initiative. And for those that are not familiar, Protect stands for Promoting Regional Outreach to Educate Communities on the Threat of Fentanyl. So when we began exploring creating a public-private partnership series around fentanyl, we took a look at exchanges we hosted in the preceding year surrounding fentanyl trafficking, such as one we had actually that took place in Los Angeles back in February 2024. And it really became really apparent to us that it's a real big challenge for financial institutions to detect this type of transactional activity. Simply because the financial flows involving fentanyl production, they really follow a really complex path. Precursor chemicals are coming from China, they're sold to Mexico, and then they're produced in these clandestine labs led by narco traffickers, and then they're shipped to the US through a variety of means, including some laundry sent packages, okay? So it's just obvious that this is a really hard thing to detect. And what we've learned through some of these prior exchanges is the financial transactions that could be fentanyl related, they raise multiple red flags in a transaction system, but those red flags can actually overlap with a lot of other types of illicit trafficking as well. So it's been really a challenge for financial institutions to identify this activity and report it and appropriately tag it in a SAR narrative. And that's why it's been so important for the US government and the private sector to basically have an open conversation about these challenges and find a more comprehensive threat picture to tackle this issue. And as you know, Craig, I used to work at a financial intelligence unit of a large bank, and I understand this challenge personally. So I got it when the moment came to set this exchange series up. So all that being said, the question now for FinCEN and IRSCI was the question of this. The question was, how does Treasury create a multiplier effect across the country to take this issue head on? This is not just a DC issue. It's not just it's a countrywide issue. And our answer was quite simply that we needed to be on the ground in the very cities that were most impacted by this horrific and deadly epidemic. And that is how, for the very first time, the FinCEN Exchange became a regional style of engagement. It's been unprecedented. And we worked with law enforcement over the course of several weeks to determine the 10 cities that ended up being the 10 cities that we hosted the FinCEN exchanges at. So, back in May in 2024, we started in Boston. We went right back on to Tucson, Arizona, Miami, Florida, Portland, Oregon, Denver, Colorado, New York, Charlotte, North Carolina, El Paso, Texas, Philadelphia. And then we actually ended the series at home here in the DMV because the issue is fraught in the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia areas. And so all that being said, our goals were twofold with the Protect series. It was one, encouraging direct communication between law enforcement and financial institutions on active investigations related to illicit trafficking of fentanyl and money laundering. And our second goal was for FinCEN and law enforcement to provide better and more regular feedback on the usefulness of BSA reporting related to illicit trafficking of fentanyl to financial institutions. So the series has ended, as you know, but I can assure you our work has not. And FinCEN will continue to work with law enforcement and financial institutions to continue tackling this problem in the new year.
This is such a great initiative. A couple of things that you said that I really liked. I think, you talked about the importance of information sharing and public-private partnership, and that's always important. But when it's something like illicit fentanyl trafficking that is hard to detect, and that you said it's very difficult for the private sector, the information sharing, the public-private partnership, the feedback becomes the essential part of effectively combating it. So I think what you're doing is so great, and I think it also addresses one of the criticisms, to be honest, that I hear from time to time about the FinCEN exchange from people out there is that it's great for those who get to participate, for those who are in Washington, D.C., but what about those who don't? And so I think this new approach of taking the exchanges on the road, 10 places across the country, it will surely address some of this. But I was wondering if maybe you can tell us a bit too about why you can't always share everything that happens at these meetings publicly, and maybe to the extent you can here, take us a little bit behind the curtain, give us some insights and some information sharing that you are able to share.
Thanks, Fred. That's a really good question. Thanks for bringing this up. You're absolutely right. We have not been able to invite every single financial institution to these exchanges. Probably you're familiar. There's about 298,000 financial institutions that are subject to FinCEN's AML program requirements. So it's just, unfortunately, it's just not feasible for us to invite every or even most financial institutions to a FinCEN exchange. But what I'll say is this. So across the 10 Protect exchanges we held in these 10 different cities and regions in the US, we actually extended invitations to 195 different financial institutions. And a lot of those were actually community and regional banks. So that averaged out to be about 20 institutions, financial institutions at a FinCEN exchange. That number 20 sounds small as well, I understand, but I can assure you that that size is actually intentional. And it's intentional because it's critical for what we're trying to achieve out of these sessions. And it goes to the objective of these sessions. So what I mean by that is this. So the goal of FinCEN Exchange is to enhance communication, enhance collaboration, and enhance partnership among FinCEN, law enforcement, and financial institutions. We found through trial and error that having about 30 to 40 individuals, not even individuals, in a room strikes the right balance. Any larger than that, the format becomes really passive and it leads to, Craig, what we dread the most, silence engagement. And at a FinCEN exchange, silence is simply just counterproductive. So, but all that being said, I mean, inclusivity, of course, is FinCEN's top priority. And so when we plan future FinCEN exchanges and we explore new topics, we will always consider thinking of ways to include other types of financial institutions at these vital discussions. So moving on the topic of readouts, the conversations that are hosted at a FinCEN exchange are confidential. And that's done because we encourage open and honest dialogue. You know, I know that's not what you want to hear. You probably want to hear a more fulsome readout, but this is actually intentional. You know, Congress codified this confidentiality requirement, aligning it with the long-standing STAR confidentiality rules, as well as sensitivities that law enforcement operates. So our press releases get into as much info as we can share, but confidentiality remains to be a very important aspect of this program, and we want to preserve the integrity of that program. So that's all I can share. But for your listeners that are financial institutions in law enforcement, just do know that insights gained from these exchanges inform our future outreach efforts, as well as topics actually for FinCEN's alerts, advisories, as well as a newer line of product that FinCEN puts out, which are called financial trends analyses.
Yeah, and FinCEN's done a lot already around fentanyl, which I'm sure encompasses a lot of this work that you've done. So go check out fincen.gov. There's a lot on fentanyl that for financial institutions, red flags, other things that you can look at today where you get the benefit of being there without being there. And I actually don't, I think 195 sounds like a lot. I think 20 sounds like a lot. I think people get that there's diminishing returns when you get too big of a room. And if the goal is to be effective, you've got to do what's effective. And if that's what you guys have found, I think that's really interesting. So I want to turn now to a lot of our audience here today will be from outside the U.S. And while in the U.S. this is a huge issue, it's a big issue for a lot of other countries as well. And when it comes to fentanyl, you guys at FinCEN and your partners within the U.S. government have been doing a lot internationally as well. I know you've had meetings in Mexico. You've recently joined a Canadian public-private partnership focused on fentanyl. Can you tell us a little bit about this work and if there's anything those located outside of the United States can do?
Thanks, Craig. So let's see, how do I address this question? So we know addressing illicit finance and the serious crimes that it enables, it's just quite simply not the responsibility of any single individual or any single government. It really just genuinely demands a unified and collective commitment. And so for those that are listening outside the US, I just want to extend my genuine gratitude for your continued partnership, like our Canadian and Mexican counterparts, which I'll get into in a moment. So FinCEN has actually been long working with its foreign FIU counterparts to share tactical information through Egmont channels. So for financial institutions that are listening, it remains really, really critical that you guys actually continue to reference to the best you can correspondent countries and transactions in your STAR narratives, because this allows FinCEN to share that information effectively and efficiently through Egmont channels to our foreign counterparts. So what's newer and kind of going to the point of your question, Craig, is what I glean to be the cross-border public-private partnership model we've developed over the past year. So here's one undisputed truth. Criminals simply do not respect borders, nor do borders in today's interconnected world. Borders no longer serve as the same physical barrier that they once were. Take, for example, our topic today, fentanyl. This isn't just a US problem. It affects all of North America. And that's why international information sharing is super vital. And that's why at Treasury, we've taken over the course of these last 2 years a really strong look at working much more closely with our foreign government counterparts and financial institutions, so both of them, to leverage kind of the collective power of using public-private partnerships in the cross-border context. So here's what we've done this last 2 years. So building on what we learned from the FinCEN exchange, which again is a domestic exchange topic, it's a domestic setting, we took that model and established a cross-border roundtable concept. And so we started this off with our Mexican counterpart. So what happened was in April 2023, we brought US and Mexican financial institutions and law enforcement. Of course, we were there as FinCEN, and then our counterparts, the Mexican WEF, were there as well, to come together and tackle shared threats like drug trafficking and like human trafficking. So this was the first time a conversation with those parties have ever taken place, and it was unprecedented. It marked the first time that it happened, and it really just genuinely speaks volumes to the trust and partnership that we've built with our Mexican counterparts. The WEF stands for Unidad de Inteligencia Financiera. Speaks volumes to that partnership we built with them. And here's what we quickly learned at those conversations. Information sharing between US and Mexico financial institutions just remains to be a consistent challenge on both sides. We spent our fall visit in February of 2024 working through those challenges. And we've actually now deployed a FinCEN, our very first FinCEN foreign financial liaison, to be stationed out of Mexico City to continue this work. So we actually have a liaison out there. It's one of our very first ones, part of the AML Act. We're very proud to have her out there. Apart from what we've been doing with Mexico, we decided to expand our efforts up north with our neighbors up north, the Canadians. And so that's when in October of 2024, we co-hosted the very first FinCEN, FinTract AML symposium in Ottawa. And that summit actually coincided with the conclusion of IRS's meetings with J5 partners. You might know J5 includes US, Canada, Australia, Netherlands, and the UK. And so we were really fortunate to actually have those J5 countries attend this summit. And so it was at that exchange, at that roundtable, at that summit, that you correctly pointed out that FinCEN joined Project Guardian, which is a Canadian-led public-private partnership focused on combating illicit financing tied to fentanyl and other synthetic opioids. And so we've just simply quite learned a great deal from both these cross-border public-private partnerships, and we're working continuously on building those out to not only support our law enforcement agents on either side of the border, but really also to kind of help mediate conversations between our financial institutions. So for financial institutions outside the US, one of the most important steps is for you to actually engage with your foreign FIUs and leverage resources they provide. You know, every country's FIU provides guidances, alerts, and advisories based on specific data and insights that they have. But these are all just really incredibly invaluable for understanding the global picture of illicit finance and how it connects to issues like fentanyl trafficking. For example, Canada, Craig. So Canada's FIU, FinTrack, they're preparing actually very soon to release updated guidance. Their alerts are called alerts, operational alerts, as part of Project Guardian. And so when this comes out, it's going to actually cover money laundering indicators tied to the production and distribution of fentanyl and other synthetic opioids. That's important because a lot of our alerts have focused on the bringing up the chemicals from China and Mexico. This is more on the distribution side. And so for the institutions that are listening that have operations in Canada, or even if you don't have operations in Canada, it's really just important that you go ahead and view this document because, while FinCEN we can only verify materials that we put out because it's based off of our own information. Nonetheless, these documents produced by our foreign counterparts, whether it be again FIUs, even organizations like FATF, when they put out these guidances, it's just simply designed to take a holistic view of a given issue from different points of view. So to wrap my blabbering off, Craig, is that ultimately these kinds of partnerships and resources are about coming together to address our shared challenges. And that is why the fight against illicit finance, particularly when it comes to something super complicated and technical like fentanyl, it is a global effort, simply a global effort. And that's why it's just so important that we continue to strengthen our cross-border partnerships if we actually want to make a stand in a position in making a difference and curbing all this activity.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, I think that's the evolution in how do we make the global AFC regime better is taking the great public-private partnerships that are happening in individual countries and expanding them. And I salute FinCEN, I salute the WEEF, I salute FinTrack, who has long been a leader in public-private partnerships because there are real issues to work through. There's data privacy challenges, there's other challenges, and it's hard. It's not easy, but that you've taken these first steps to make progress and can build upon it going forward, I think is just really great. Well, we are almost at time. And so you've given us a lot today. We've learned a lot about the work you're doing. So I wanted to give you a chance to ask something back of our community. You've got a group watching this live and on tape who are, mission-driven people who are hearing this, who want to make a difference. And so I guess I'll give you two different ways that you can answer the question. You can do one or both, whatever is most helpful for you. So one, I guess, is there anything you want to ask from the audience today that they can do to help you? And or do you have any advice for them to help them better do their work, which, as you discussed, ultimately helps you and the other FIUs around the world?
Thanks, Craig. Okay, so you know what? Yes, I do. And I want to address it directly to the law enforcement agents and the financial institutions that are listening right now. So one of the most effective ways to enhance collaboration is by leveraging information sharing programs like Sections 314A and 314B programs like here in the US. For those that are listening that are unfamiliar with what these are, 314A is a program that allows law enforcement through FinCEN to reach out to US financial institutions to locate accounts or transactions tied to persons or entities suspected of involvement in terrorism or money laundering based on credible evidence. And then the 314B program, on the other hand, enables financial institutions to share information with one another under a safe harbor. It offers protections from liability, and this is truly a key way for financial institutions to enhance their AML-CFT regimes and, of course, enhance their reporting. So as my ask, let's start with the power of 314A for the law enforcement agents listening to this. One really critical thing that we've learned through the Protect series and our FinCEN Exchange series thus far is a misconception about how 314A is to be used. There's an impression, likely from past practices, that 314A is a tool of last resort, only to be used when all other financial leads have been exhausted. And so, Craig, I just want to set the record straight. 314A program is not a program of last resort. It's an extremely useful tool that can be utilized during an active investigation at any point of the investigation, not at the very end. And it helps law enforcement locate accounts tied to persons or entities potentially involved in acts of terrorism or money laundering. So that being said, though, to be clear, it doesn't, of course, replace the need for a subpoena or other legal processes, but it's a really, really effective tool to identify new leads. And it really helps law enforcement. It should help law enforcement focus investigations by pinpointing relevant banks and accounts. And what's more, maybe law enforcement doesn't realize, so we also learn from the exchanges, is they don't realize that 314A actually can create a virtuous cycle. What I mean is this: when a financial institution receives a 314A, they of course respond to it as they see fit, but they also use it as a way to ensure compliance with FinCEN's regulations. So what that means is they may initiate additional investigations using information from a 314A, which for law enforcement means you now have newer STAR filings. So even though, so through a 314A, a financial institution could actually help law enforcement build out an investigation more than they would have otherwise had and known. That's for law enforcement. And so for financial institutions listening, I cannot emphasize enough, you've been hearing a lot of FinCEN say this, but the importance it is to build relationships with your peers and take full advantage of 314B. This also has come up very frequently at the FinCEN exchanges. And this is also a misconception too, and I want to clarify this as well. So a financial institution does not need to have reached a conclusive determination of suspicious activity in order to share information at a 314B, through a 314B. Nor do the information that you want to share have to be tied to money laundering. For example, if the activity involves fraud, 314B applies. The key requirements here, though, Craig, is the reasonable basis to believe that the information being shared relates to activities that may involve money laundering or terrorist financing, and that you're sharing the information for purposes under Section 314B. It has to just comply with the reg. We put out an updated fact sheet back in December 2020. If folks want to pull that up, page 3 of that document says that 314B participants may share information about transactions involving one or more specified unlawful activities, or SUAs. I'm not going to dive into the technicalities of what an SUA is. I'm not a lawyer, but because that term is really broad, but what it simply says is that it refers to any crime that can be used to charge money laundering. This includes things like narcotics and fraud offenses. So essentially, if it's illegal to launder or spend the proceeds of certain crimes, those crimes are likely SUAs. And because they are SUAs, financial institutions can utilize 314B. And so we just simply cannot understate how important it is for law enforcement to use 314A and for financial institutions to use 314B. These are just incredibly useful tools, and we strongly encourage the continued use of those.
Yeah, definitely echo that. And for regular viewers of ACAMS Live, you might recall that we had Katie Ford from FinCEN on about this time last year, where we did an in-depth conversation around just this, 314B. So if you scroll back in the ACAMS feed, if you missed it the first time, everything Dilara is talking about today, Katie gets into a level of depth around it, addresses the criticisms, concerns, misconceptions, all of that in great detail. So if you want to learn more about that, scroll up in the feed, go back to the interview with Katie, and you'll get a lot more detail. Well, Dilara, I wish we could do this all day, but we are about at time. I just want to thank you for everything that you're doing, that FinCEN's doing, IRSCI, and all the others throughout the U.S. government and internationally too, which I think is really cool. It really does matter. It really does keep us safe. And the role that FinCEN plays in doing that, and this new approach with the regional bodies and all of that, I just think is great and will make us all effective and safer. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you to all of you out there for watching, and we will see you next time on ACAMS Live.